The orders from the captain became unbearable. Ivar, the first mate, tried to count the days afloat, but even if he did his best to concentrate, he didn't stand a chance to come to a result. Finally, he got tired. Tired of the static view, tired of the never-ending sea storm, tired of the fear. One more time, the sun started to set. There was land in sight. Tomorrow they would anchor on the mainland. Captain Gorm told the crew to line up so they could take another shot. He ordered Ivar down to the vessel's bottom to get some liquid metal on deck. Ivar obeyed and grabbed the ladder down to the lower deck. Dead bodies lay on the floor. Remains of the crew members chosen by Captain Gorm to be slaughtered. The only livestock on board. Ivar took a closer look at the bodies. One was the corpse of old Bram, the wisest man on board, but weakened by age, Captain Gorm gave the order to sacrifice him because of Bram's weakness and the crew's hunger. Some of the crew guessed that Gorm ordered Bram's death because he was too smart. Pain in the arse for the captain. With the death of Bram, no one on board would even think of denying Gorm's orders. And so, madness took its course. Bram's blood, oozing into the boards of the lower deck, had formed a scabrous crust, a skeleton with sculpted skin torn to shreds ripped of his remains. His flesh was eaten by the crew. The rats did the rest. Next to him lay the corpse of Mursai, a boy aged 13. Nobody on board could tell exactly why he lost his mind. Maybe he took too many shots. Maybe all the violence and aggression of the crew's barbaric foray drove him into madness. With the growing lack of livestock, the only sure thing was that he had to die. Ivar grabbed a flagon of liquid metal, took a deep breath and made his way out of the vessel's womb. Rodmar, one of the seamen, was lying on the upper deck, screaming in pain. His severed hands lying next to him. Captain Gorm stood over Rodmar, the blade of his sword covered with blood. The captain was raging, apparently attacking him for no reason. As Gorm lifted his arm to strike the next blow, he noticed the smell of liquid metal taking over his mind instantly. He dropped his sword. Liquid metal turned seamen into warriors, releasing their true destiny, feeding their desire to slaughter. Tomorrow they would stand on solid ground. They had to celebrate. Every one of them had a battle trophy of a human skull. Once it held the enemy's mind. Now it endowed glory to the victor. Drinking from the skull gave the warriors the ability to see through his enemy's eyes, to succeed in battle. The crew lined up for their shot, except two. One was Ivar, whose duty was to pour the liquid metal. The other was Rodmar, still screaming in pain. As Ivar filled the first skull, the crew heard the sound of a blade. It was Rodmar's, raging and rushing at his captain. Gorm reacted with lightning speed and used his skull as a shield. Rodmar's blade cut it in two. With his bare hand, Gorm grabbed Rodmar's blade, cutting deep into his fingers. Snatching the sword by its hilt, he slashed at Rodmar's throat. A satisfied grin lit up Gorm's face as Rodmar's head left his body. The captain looked at his skull, now cut in two. It was of no use anymore. He had to get a new one. At daybreak, the ship weighed anchor on the coast. A tiny village came in sight. The villagers seemed to be preparing for an attack. Windows and doors were barred. A group of men were receiving orders from their chief. Some wore armor and swords. The rest, having to face battle in ordinary clothes, armed only with hay-forks. Even though Captain Gorm observed from a distance, he could smell the men's fear. It would be a piece of cake to reduce the village to rubble. They would take their stolen goods on board and use the women to answer nature's sexual call. The most solid building was the church, located in the middle of the village. Gorm felt in his bones the women were locked inside. It would make a nice bonfire. But since his skull was broken, battle must be joined. Without the power of liquid metal, the crew was nervous. Usually they couldn't wait to slaughter. This time was different. Gorm looked at his men. They were tall and strong, with countless battles to their credit, but he knew they were scared of facing an enemy without the powers of the liquid metal. Gorm was jolted from his thoughts by an approaching villager who said he came in peace and offered the whole village's goods in exchange for their lives. Peace? When Gorm heard that word, he barely stopped himself from beheading the man immediately. The goods of the village could make them wealthy, but that wouldn't be enough. The village women could satisfy them, but that wouldn't last long. What he needed was a fresh skull. The skull of the cutest virgin the doomed village had to offer. Knowing the village men would protect her with their lives, it was unavoidable to raze this place to the ground. As unavoidable as breaking the virgin's neck after breaking her virginity. Now Gorm followed his first impulse and beheaded the villager. With a roar, he rushed towards the village, followed by his crew. Battle broke out. It didn't take long for Gorm to stab his blade into a dozen bodies, and as the last of the village men were massacred, Ivar, the first mate, took his firestone and set light to the houses' roofs. In minutes, the once peaceful village turned into a burning hell. Screams of fear could be heard from inside the church. Seamen gathered at its gate and smashed it down. Inside, Gorm's assumption proved true. The women were in there. Now all he had to do was to find the cutest. And to his surprise, quite a few looked damn good. He chuckled evilly. Today, these women would spend time with real men. For himself, he chose a tall, slender girl with long black hair, old enough to be pubescent, young enough to be a virgin. He ripped off her dress and gasped. The girl had the longest, softest legs he'd ever seen. Her skin flawless, her body simply perfect. Gorm forgot everything around him. The burning village, the groans of his crew, and the screams of the other women. He leered at his beautiful prize and saw the horror in her green eyes. His erection was rampant. He forced her legs open and brought the tip of his filthy cock into position. Next, he roughly grabbed her hips. The girl trembled, for she knew what was going to happen. Gorm clenched his muscles and rammed his cock into her vagina. She screamed. Gorm waited for a slight easing of her pain. Then he started. Oh, her vagina felt damned good. He went faster and faster, approaching the top, then withdrew his cock, turned the girl around and grabbed her tight ass. Again, he slipped into her vagina. The girl was breathing and moaning heavily. Naturally, Gorm could have climaxed immediately after first thrusting his cock into that piece of flesh, but he wanted to enjoy a body like this. Nearing orgasm again, he withdrew his cock, forced her to her knees and put his cock in her mouth. He jerked off at the very moment his bell end touched her tongue. Sated, Gorm looked around him. His crew had all grabbed women and had done the same as him. He could hear the flames of the burning village outside. Now he was about to reach his goal. He pulled his cock out of the girl's mouth, and with a terrified look at Gorm, she swallowed. He seized her head with one hand, her shoulder with the other, and with a violent jerk wrenched her head round 180 degrees. Placing her on the altar, he pulled out his blade and cut her head from her body. He removed the skin, eyes, and brain from the lifeless girl's skull. Gorm knew that this would be his masterpiece, a warrior's delight. Now it was time for a shot. He called to his men. This time they would celebrate like there's no tomorrow. The seamen offered up their skulls, into which Ivar poured the liquid metal. With a mighty roar, the Vikings raised their skulls to the sky. Today, they had defeated again.